Iran has arrested several people it says are responsible for the downing of Ukraine International Airlines Flight 752, which crashed last week, killing all 176 people on board. Iranian authorities have yet to disclose exactly how many individuals it detained in relation to the incident. On Friday, Iran's government took responsibility for the crash, saying a preliminary investigation determined human error in its military defense systems led to the accident. Foreign Minister Javad Zarif said on Twitter at the time, quote, "Our profound regrets, apologies, and condolences to our people, to the families of all victims, and to other affected nations." To discuss how average Iranians are responding to the tragedy, as well as the recent crackdown on Iranian news and social media accounts online, I spoke earlier with Satare Sagde, a PhD candidate in North American Studies at the University of Tehran. Satare, I wanted to start by offering my condolences to you. I heard that your brother's friend actually died in this tragic accident. How did you first find out about this crash, and what was the initial reaction in Iran before an official story was released?
Thank you for your condolences. I heard about the accident through the different news outlets. Like I have my news notifications on my iPhone, and the notification just popped up on my phone early in the morning. And well, at first, because I didn't, we didn't know about how the accident happened, but still, it was very shocking to know that, like, your fellow citizens have died in an accident. But as the story developed and there were rumors online, they appeared to be rumors that the plane was shot by a missile. It became more stressful. And then when I found out that there were people we knew on that plane, it became even more, heartbreaking. And human lives are equal, but when you know someone in the tragedy, it becomes more personal and
Absolutely.
more intense. Yeah. So it was really sad. And I was just hoping, and when I heard that it was, the plane was shut down by mistake by a missile, um, I was just hoping that was not true. It became even a lot more heartbreaking. And still, I am looking, everyone is looking for why this happened. And I think, like, personally, I haven't been convinced yet how and why this happened, because it doesn't really, there are so many stories, and it looks like suspicious.
What is most suspicious to you? I'm wondering if people do accept the official story.
Well, there are people who accept it, but what I hear from my friends and who from like online, following up on the the hashtags that are trending and everything, people are very suspicious. They cannot see that this happened as a system error or an error by the anti-missile system. It looks more like a plot, because who it was Trump who first announced that, and announced that he was suspicious about it. So it doesn't look very much. How is it possible that they were the first to find out about it, and then the Iranian government started exploring the possibility of such a thing, and then they found out and they announced that that was true.
You're talking about the results, the results of the crash, or the cause, the investigation. You're saying the United States was the first to come out with its version of events, and then the Iranian government later confirmed it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, because from the first videos, everyone was saying that it's impossible that it was shut down by a missile. But then more videos came out from New York Times more recently that add more suspicious versions to the story. And also the fact that, like I said, it was the U.S. government who first announced that they think um, the plane didn't just simply crash due to some technical issue, but because it was mistakenly shut down. So there are so many versions of the story that make it even more suspicious. But for example, I can refer to one video published by New York Times, and they have given the credit to someone who happens to be a journalist working for Iran International, which is a Saudi-funded anti-Iran, news station. And
This was the video that surfaced on a Telegram channel?
I think so. That's yeah.
And so it's suspicious that it would come from a Saudi source, you're saying? So a source that's funded actually to...
I mean, that's not where the suspicion come from. That's because it happened. I mean, it appears that the person who is filming was ready to
Yes.
film that incident. I mean, you don't. It was 6 o'clock in the morning. It was in the outskirt of Tehran. That's not normal. Like you are filming the sky and suddenly a missile attacks an airliner, and then you don't show any excitement. It's like you were expecting that to happen. He doesn't scream. He doesn't act like he was shocked or anything. I mean, anyone who is behind a camera, we don't know if it's a he or a she. So that's just like one thing that makes it very suspicious. And we're waiting for the analysis of the black box and the committee of different countries who had citizens on board and different partners who are carrying out the analysis. So personally, I am waiting for them to see like what's going to come out. And it's been very stressful following up on every version of the story that comes out, and finally you don't know what the truth is. So I think the only thing that I personally can do at this moment is to wait for the final analysis and see what's going to happen.
Since the Iranian government took responsibility, corporate media in the West has broadcast images of Iranians in the streets claiming they want to overthrow their government in some instances. Based on your assessment, how large are these demonstrations and what is driving them? What are their demands? Are they one cohesive group? What exactly is going on?
Well, I live in the third largest city of Iran. And here, I personally haven't seen any protests. I have heard from friends that there are a few protests going on in some part of the city, and they're not very large, really. In Tehran, usually, I mean, that's the place that usually is more, represented by mainstream media. If, for example, let's say 1,000 people in Tehran take to the streets to protest, then that's mainly shown as the entire population of Iran, as if, Tehran represents the entire Iran, which is not true. There are people who are requesting or demanding that someone within the IRGC or government officials who have been in some way connected to this tragedy to, resign. But listening to the slogans that are chanted by people on the streets in Tehran, especially, and there are different slogans, and there are different types of people. Some of them were university students who have friends on board the plane. There were also people who are we have had protests over the past few months, and it seems like people those people who have taken to the streets are waiting for some excuse to come to to take to the streets and express their demands. Some of them, I mean, most people have very legitimate grievances and they want to be heard. But there are also others who are easily, I would say, influenced by those narratives of what is happening inside Iran, offered by Western corporate media. For example, there was this, there was this tendency to try to say that the almost 25 million population, I mean, people who took to the streets to attend the funeral of General Soleimani, were as if they were not representative of the 80 million population of Iran, and that the narrative given by the state media, also reflected by, I mean, all media everywhere, is not a valid one. So you see a few people tearing posters of General Soleimani, and then that's taken to represent entire Iran, which, I mean, that's absolutely very, I would say, mistaken perception of what is happening in Iran right now.
Yeah, I have seen the way mainstream media works up close. For example, when I would cover police brutality demonstrations in Baltimore, there would be these massive peaceful demonstrations in the street, and then a small group of people yelling at the police or being violent, and all of the mainstream cameras would be videotaping just those 10 people and forgetting about the hundreds of others that were there. So I can only imagine what that's like when there's a concerted effort to actually demonize your government. Who do people blame for this incident? Do they purely look at the Iranian government and say, this is your fault? Or do they recognize that there were hostilities escalated in the region as a result of U.S. action? Or you're saying that you don't even feel that you have a satisfactory answer here?
Like I said, yeah, because there are ongoing analyses that we are waiting for. I mean, I personally and many of my friends. But yes, there were people. There was actually a very huge protest in Mashhad today, where people supported the IRGC, and they said that even if this is a mistake done by someone in the IRGC, we are not going to ignore the services that they have offered to the people in the past, like the fight against ISIS, or when they were helping volunteers in different parts of the country when there was a flood, an earthquake, or so on and so forth. And there were also people who said that this is due to the escalating tensions that particularly Trump and the U.S. government are causing in the region. If had the U.S. not assassinated this very popular general, Iran would not retaliate, and there would not be tension that, because on the day that this jet was downed, Iran was on high alert because there were threats coming from the U.S. that there would be attacks on Iran. So, I mean, you cannot ignore the fact that Trump was the person who had created this or escalated this tension. And the fact that the U.S. Military bases are all around Iran, and we're like, basically we are always threatened by the United States, either through sanctions or through their military presence, or when they fund terrorist groups against Iran. And for example, the case of MEK, that they delisted them, and they have been funding them and arming them and training them. In one case, I remember, I think it was during George W. Bush's presidency, when they were training MEKs in Nevada to assassinate, together with Mossad, to assassinate our nuclear scientists. So we haven't been left in peace by the United States over the past 41 years. And even if, I mean, we have like any other population, a nation, we would have legitimate grievances against our government. But when we look at how our enemies are unified and are in their aggression against us, then we prefer to stay, we prefer to support our government and stay united and do not voice our grievances for some time until these threats lessen a little bit, and then we can demand some changes or reforms or whatever at peace, but not while the country is under threats, constant threats coming from especially the United States.
Talk more about that, because President Trump has said, and the United States has already issued more sanctions against Iran. Trump last week, speaking after the retaliatory strike on U.S. bases, said that the escalation from him was going to now come through sanctions, what Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif describes as economic terrorism. How does that feel for someone like you and other average Iranians? We don't hear enough in the United States, I think, about the fact that we are already at war with Iran because we're waging this economic, it really is terrorism against the population. So what is the impact of sanctions on people like you?
Well, when I heard President Trump saying that he's going to impose new round of sanctions on Iran, not just me, but also many other Iranians were like, is there any form of sanctions left?
I even heard someone on mainstream corporate U.S. media, a correspondent, make the same point. She said, Andrea Mitchell from MSNBC, I don't know what's left to sanction.
Exactly. That's how we have felt. I mean, and we have become so used to new rounds of sanctions that we already don't we don't panic hearing that there are new sanctions going to be imposed on the country. But yeah, it's very aggressive. And I always make this point to my friends from other countries that let's imagine that there is a majority of Iranians who are against their governments. I mean, that's not true, but even if we imagine that. Now, there are pressures by imposing sanctions on Iranians. There are pressures coming from both sides. And the people who are being sanctioned have no choice and have no chance to voice their grievances in a peaceful way and to witness that they are being heard. So it's like pressure from both sides. And but because the Iranian government enjoys some, legitimacy and also popularity, it just makes them more, supportive of the government because they see how brutal the enemy is, and no matter how the people at home treat them, they say like, okay, foreigners are worse at treating us, so there's no hope to look outside Iran for change. But especially over the past couple of years, it has become very difficult with sanctions because they are really aimed at crippling our economy. The value of rial dropped a lot, and it has become almost impossible for Iran to export oil in exchange for foreign currency coming into the country. We have been exporting in exchange for commodities, but that doesn't really help the country in the way it should. And I know family members I had family members, and I know friends who had family members who have been severely affected by sanctions on especially medicines. Recently, one of my friends lost an aunt who was suffering from some sort of cancer, and whose medication became very rare, very, very expensive for some time, and then impossible to find in the country because of the sanctions. And that's a story we hear from many people who have family members or who are themselves suffering from some sort of, special diseases or cancer. And that's really disheartening. And it's, I mean, for me personally, it could be that I cannot, for example, go out with my friends and eat out with my friends as often as I would previously. But in the long run, there is, I mean, it makes our economy so unstable that it's very difficult to imagine and plan a future, a financial or professional future for ourselves, because there are changes in the economy due to the sanctions every now and then, and it's so stressful that what's going to happen next? Am I going to lose my job? Am I going to find that my savings do not, I mean, are they not worth the same amount that they were? There are so many issues like that that are affecting ordinary people in
And
many ways.
And that's the intended result of this policy, especially when you talk about people actually dying from lack of medicine. These are people who are dying as a result of U.S. policy. Iranians are dying. The U.S. government is responsible for these deaths, and the U.S. public doesn't necessarily feel as though they're at war the way they would with a traditional military conflict. The Iranian state-run network Press TV's UK channel was recently removed from YouTube as part of what appears to be an anti-Iran crackdown. This after Instagram moved to take down what it deemed to be pro-Soleimani content. What do you think they're so afraid of?
Because I think especially when the images of the massive funeral of General Soleimani went viral, and it was so impressive that few news outlets could ignore that. I think they were fearing that the correct and truthful narrative of what's happening in Iran is going to be heard by many people through alternative media or through social media online. They were really scared of that. For sure, it was very scary for the United States to see that they have actually assassinated a very popular figure in Iran. And according to a Maryland survey, General Soleimani was, if I'm not mistaken, the second most popular in Iran, and with above 80 something percent of popularity in Iran. So when you see that, when the world finds out that the United States assassinated someone so popular with a nation, and they actually did so while he was on some sort of a diplomatic mission. And he was, he had a planned meeting with the Iraqi MP, and they were going to discuss the relations between Iran and Syria the same day that he was assassinated. So I think the mainstream media could not miss that story. Then it was the United States and those the corporations that run those social media platforms that were scared that this story would be heard by more and more people around the world, and then they would no longer buy the lies that the mainstream media have been telling them about Iran.
Yeah.
And it was so extensive that, like you said, any content about General Soleimani was brought down on Instagram. There, a lot of my friends got their accounts either suspended or removed forever because they posted just one picture of General Soleimani. And
Wow.
when that's like ridiculous. The social media, and if you that social media was meant to give platform to those who are seldom heard. And when you are censoring them, you are violating the, I mean, one of the main purposes that social media could follow online. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
by allowing people to speak face to face and I mean,
And
like
speak for
directly without
themselves.
governments involved.
Speak for themselves as opposed to hearing it from Voice of America or CNN. They couldn't control the narrative anymore. And so it was quite stunning to see how quickly these social media groups jumped to censor content, which contradicted not only the mainstream media's line, but also the US government line. They were telling us that Soleimani was hated and that he was responsible for all of these brutal deaths in Iran. And then you see millions of people in the streets, you start to question whether or not what's being told to you is true. What would you like US citizens to keep in mind as they digest news from Iran in the coming days? How can they think critically about what's going on?
I think they, I mean, the main thing is that unlike what has been like circulating by mainstream media and corporate media in the United States, uh, the other countries are also, I mean, they're normal. Your politicians are not qualified to say which country acts normal and which country does not. Which nation is more human than the other one?
They love to say Iran is a rogue state.
Yeah, yeah, that's, I mean, when you think about this, um, that just like what happens in the United States and France, for example, where a yellow vest take to the street, but they have legitimate demands and they have been protesting for so long, but they're not necessarily asking for their government to step down or to they're not seeking to overthrow their government. The regime that the United States is portraying in Iran has been elected by the Iranian people. Iranian people are enjoying a democracy which may need reform in many ways. Like other nations may feel, like there are groups in other nations who feel that one part of the system or the entire system needs reforms, but they're not necessarily seeking to overthrow their government. This is one thing. And the other thing is that I wish that they could, because with Instagram and Twitter and Facebook removing those posts and limiting our connections, I wish there would be more people to people connection with our nation and the American nation to hear different voices from Iran and from the United States directly without the involvement of any state, any corporate media, and to put away all those misrepresentations and stereotypes and discuss everything in a peaceful manner where like real people are heard and they're not represented by I don't know, some Saudi funded or some US funded media or some terrorist group who have the blood of so many Iranians on their hands.
Well, that's why I appreciate you taking time to speak with me today, because you're definitely a voice that I think people should be listening to in the United States. Can people follow your work anywhere? Are you on Twitter?
Thank you for having me, and I really appreciate that. Yes, I am on Twitter. That's Leelako, Leelako.
All right, Sitare Sadaghe, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.